In business today, three things to know. First, consumers cheer. Confidence hits a 7-year high, even as world crises escalate. Then, contagion. The terrifying Ebola virus spreads in Africa. Besides the devastating human toll, there is worry the virus will infect the economy. And the coming out parties for big-name companies. What's giving rise to the spike in companies going public? Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Americans are feeling the summer spirit. Despite some soft economic data lately, consumer confidence took off in July. Consumer confidence rose to its highest level since 2007. According to the Conference Board, the index climbed to 90.9 in July, up from 86.4 in June, and that topped economists' forecasts. Consumer confidence is considered a leading indicator, meaning if we feel good about the economy, we then go shopping. As we noted, this is a big week for economic news, and later we will get the second quarter gross domestic product numbers, and on Friday, the big labor report. So far, stocks hovered around the break-even point for most of the day until falling off the cliff towards the end. Here are the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 70.48 to 16,912. The S&P 500 down 0.5%, and the NASDAQ off just fractionally to 44.4270. Corporate earnings season is still underway, and here are some of the companies we are watching. Shares of Twitter tweeted out quite a good earnings report. They surged by more than 20% in after-hours trading. It released its earnings report after the bell for the first time as a publicly traded company. The company reporting earnings of 2 cents a share on $312 million in revenue. That was up 124% year over year. Twitter closing up during regular hours of 67 cents to 38.60, but as we mentioned, up 30% in after-hours trading. UPS announcing second quarter per-share earnings of $5. That's lower than expected. Revenue of about $14.25 billion was, though, above consensus. UPS closing down 3.80 to 98.86. Pfizer reporting earnings per share of 58 cents. That beat estimates by 2 cents. Revenue coming in at $12.8 billion this quarter. That also topped expectations, and Pfizer closing down 37 cents. Taking a look at commodities, gold closing down 280 to an even 1,350, and oil pulling back 78 cents to $189 a barrel. Are we in a happier economy? Michelle Clayman is Chief Investment Officer with New Amsterdam Partners. Michelle, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Thank you.
Let's start with consumer confidence. Do Americans pay any attention to what's going on in the world? We have a war in Ukraine. We have a war in the Middle East. We have this deadly virus that may come and kill us all. Yet people are feeling great. Why?
Well,
a depressing intro. I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, what a way to start. The U.S. is a long way from those places,
sure.
and in many ways we're insulated. So if we look at the U.S. economy is chugging along. People are feeling better because the employment situation is improving. So that probably bumped up the confidence numbers. Now, it isn't all cheerful. We had some housing numbers that were a little weaker than people had hoped for earlier in the day. But if one can ignore the rest of the world, then the U.S. is in good shape. And the rest of the world, the U.S. is less affected by Russia than maybe our friends in Europe are,
sure.
because Europe does a lot more trading with Russia than the U.S. does.
And, I'll ask you about sanctions in a moment, but what goes sort of into this consumer confidence number? This is an emotional number. So you mentioned that employment, so people have jobs, people see their friends getting jobs. Mm-hmm. Wages are starting to improve a little bit.
Yeah.
But the housing market has to be a little bit of a concern here, because ultimately it's how much our houses are worth that really drives a lot of this, isn't it?
Yeah, housing prices were still up 9.9% year over year, so they're still going up. It's just not as rapidly as they had been for the last few years. Of course, they'd taken a huge knock during the Great Depression. The consumer is deleveraging. The consumer isn't as keen to rack up mortgage debt to buy more house. So I think that's what we're seeing in the housing market.
But they appear to be keen on racking up some debt because debt levels seem to be rising, meaning credit card debt and shopping.
Yes, modestly.
The Fed is meeting now, and we'll get an idea of what they're thinking maybe tomorrow. Do you perceive any sort of change in their philosophy, because we do have some solid economic news? On the other hand, they do look at the global risk out there.
Yes, and I think that is going to temper whatever they do for the time being, because the recovery is still fairly fragile, and the Fed isn't going to want to rock the boat too much.
What do you think of the Dallas Fed president, though, who wrote this op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, who says that there's a danger of being too loose too long, and that he's a hawk, and we know that, and he's urging a more rapid interest rate increase, I guess. Does he have, I mean, it's Janet Yellen's committee, obviously, but does he have anything behind him that might suggest that they may move more quicker?
If you look at some of the economic data points, they're pretty bullish. So the ISM surveys have been coming in nicely. We've talked about employment. You know, not only has unemployment gone down, but the quit rate has gone up. So that means that people are willing to quit their jobs because they think they can get another one. So those are all bullish signs. Mr. Fisher is right that we have to be careful that we don't inadvertently unleash the inflation demon, although at this point it seems not to be imminent. When
you look at the markets, though, we have a bunch of gloomsayers out there, and they sort of make their money doing that. We have Mark Faber. We have former Texas Congressman Ron Paul, who is no friend of the Fed, who says we're in this huge asset bubble. And today, he says we're headed for a major market crash. Not that he is a investment guru by any means that we know of. How do you respond to those comments?
Corporate earnings have been coming in okay. I would say that they have actually surprised to the upside, so that is providing some kind of a floor to the market. As we've talked about, some of the economic indicators are improving. Now, yes, the market is up quite a bit this year, more than people had expected going into the year. I think the biggest risk to the market would be from geopolitical issues. If, heaven forbid, we entered another war, if the crisis with Russia escalated.
And that's something that we obviously don't know much about. Okay, Michelle Clayman, Chief Investment Officer with New Amsterdam Partners. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. An American doctor who had been treating Ebola victims in Liberia is said to be in grave condition after becoming infected himself. 33-year-old Kent Brantley is the second top doctor to have contracted the virus. Today, Dr. Sheikh Umar Khan died in Sierra Leone. They are among more than 600 victims of a virus that has no cure. Meantime, Nigerian authorities have shut and quarantined a Lagos hospital where a finance consultant has died. It's the first recorded case of the highly infectious disease in Africa's largest economy. Lagos, home to 21 million people and the site of Nigeria's first recorded Ebola death. Authorities there say they're moving fast to eliminate the possible spread of the fatal disease and are keen to reassure its residents, according to the state commissioner for health.
The state and the federal governments are up in arms to ensure that the virus does not escape and that no Nigerian is infected with this virus.
The victim, a Liberian finance consultant, collapsed on arrival at Lagos Airport and was then taken to the first consultant's hospital. That's been closed. Now begins the more complex task of tracing and monitoring anyone who was in contact with him.
So far, a total of 59 contacts have been registered, and this consists of 44 hospital contacts. 38 were healthcare workers and 6 were laboratory staff, and also included 15 airport contacts.
Nigeria knows well the potential cost of Ebola. Its neighbors in West Africa are struggling to contain an outbreak that's already claimed more than 600 lives. Most of the deaths have been in Sierra Leone.
The first time I've treated an Ebola epidemic of this size, there are hundreds of deaths. We've had cases that we've missed. We just can't keep track of the epidemic. It goes in all directions and we have few resources.
And further away, markets are beginning to note the prospect of another major worry to add to an already list of geopolitical and other risks.
Global disease has been absolutely on the list of strategic thinkers ever since we had the SARS and bird flu scares, and Ebola clearly is a #1 nasty.
Dr. Alaina George is on the advisory council of Project 21 Black Leadership Network and an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. She joins us now by phone. Dr. George, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
What causes these outbreaks and why is Ebola in Africa to begin with?
That's a very good question. I don't believe that anybody has the answer to it at this point. It showed up very abruptly in 1996 in Congo, and it was felt that it may have been from animal transmission to humans by direct contact. Since that point, it's just shown up sporadically, and this is really the worst outbreak in the history of the Ebola virus epidemic, and since it showed up, and we just don't know why.
But these kind of diseases tend to sort of burn themselves out, don't they? Because, from what I understand, Ebola strikes quickly and kills quickly?
That's correct. It's fast onset with upwards of 90% mortality rate. So by the time it could be spread, people rarely survive it long enough to pass it on to others. That's what's a little bit different about this outbreak. It seems to be spreading. I've never seen or heard of it spreading to this level this quickly. And now we also know that it can be passed by air travel. Then it puts a whole other spin on it.
Do we have the resources, and does Africa have the financial resources to adequately combat Ebola?
I listened to the blurb that you had before I came on, and the answer is probably not without help from the international community, not without help from the World Health Organization. I think this has to be really a concerted effort that's going to really quarantine these folks, test people, because the problem with Ebola is that you can have it and not show the symptoms, and then when you get it, it's almost too late. So it can incubate from 2 days to 3 weeks, and so it's very difficult to pick up quickly.
This is obviously, it takes an incredible human toll here, but there's a financial impact as well. Do you have any idea of how this impacts the economies of the countries that are dealing with this?
Well, now that the international community is taking note, I think it's going to could potentially have a chilling effect on international travel, on business propositions, on tourism. So I think it can have a ripple throughout an African economy because of it.
Yeah, and obviously Africa across the board is certainly picking up in tourism, and you start to hear this, and you look at Nigeria. It's Africa's largest economy. They have a very robust tourism economy, as well as a robust foreign investment in businesses, and at some point this does get chilling.
Definitely. I know that as an American citizen, I'm thinking twice about going to Africa, and I know that there are American doctors and Doctors Without Borders, the healthcare professionals, and so it makes you really think about what could happen if you go there, and if you are a member of the health community, what's the chance of you getting it? We've lost the top 2 doctors that were on the front line of the Ebola fight.
And they couldn't even get out of the country, could they? There was some effort to get them to Europe, I understand, and you don't even want to move them because of how contagious this is.
That's correct.
Is there, obviously, Americans are certainly asking, is there a risk that this can jump to either America or even to Europe? And if so, what can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, the answer is most likely yes. Just knowing that it can go from Liberia into Nigeria by air travel. This is a global economy, global community. Everybody's getting on planes, and if you have cold flu-like symptoms is what this usually presents as, you don't think twice if someone's sneezing next to you. But potentially that could be a problem because it's passed by secretions, by body fluids, and perhaps by sexual transmission. So it's potential to kind of invade, environment without people knowing it. I think the first thing that people need to do is if they're going to an endemic area or they've come from one, maybe they might, if they're not feeling well, they should see their doctor and be tested. That's number one, to protect themselves and their families.
Okay. Dr. Alaina George, thank you so much for your insight today.
My pleasure.
Coming up, the American president announcing new sanctions against Russia as well as Europe. And Europe announcing sanctions against Russia. And Russia's response, we'll have it when we come back here on Arise Exchange. Last week on Arise Exchange, is it economic treason to move headquarters for better tax treatment?
This is about enabling American companies to compete on a level playing field.
We all like to post photos of ourselves on Facebook. Perhaps it's best not to post a picture of yourself wearing the dress you stole. Me worry? That is the message from the U.S. stock market as global tensions are overshadowed.
Yes, headline on Ukraine, but where's it going to fall to the bottom line?
Watch this week for more Arise Exchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs, or they got pregnant at an early age. And I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
The Europeans won up the Americans Tuesday with an arms embargo against Russia as they kick up the diplomatic battle over Russia's military involvement in Ukraine. In addition to the embargo, the EU sanctions ban the sale or trading of bonds and securities issued by Russian-owned banks. And President Obama announcing bans on additional Russian banks and, most significantly, the sale of technology that could support the Russian oil sector.
The United States is imposing new sanctions in key sectors of the Russian economy: energy, arms, and finance. We're blocking the exports of specific goods and technologies to the Russian energy sector. We're expanding our sanctions to more Russian banks and defense companies. And we're formally suspending credit that encourages exports to Russia and financing for economic development projects in Russia.
Arise Washington Bureau Chief James Blue has more now from D.C. James, it does appear that the Europeans really had the more bite today with their sanctions, would you say?
You know, Andrew, they did have more bite, but they also, not to be crass about it, they have that plane sitting on the ground in Europe that took off from the airport in Amsterdam, and that really was the impetus for Europe to finally get on board. The U.S. has been trying sanctions for the past 4 months. The EU has sort of lagged behind, but really the downing of the Malaysian air flight really coalesced things, and they were able to come together as a united group of countries and really stick it to the Russians.
And what are the sanctions that the EU announced today?
Basically, what the EU is doing, the sort of minor things, they are banning trades from financial dealings with some of Putin's cronies, 2 or 3 cronies. The big ticket items, you can no longer buy or sell or trade any sort of Russian securities if you are a bank in the EU or if you're a citizen. It basically means that the entire EU market can't sort of deal with the Russian banks. Combined with the impact of the U.S. sanctions, and again, these are on state banks, combined with the U.S. sanctions, this really sort of puts a big ring fence around the Russian banks, many of whom have debt in dollars, and so they're going to have a trouble trying to service their debt. It's a real big, significant move.
And there is something for everyone in this, because Germany may be the biggest to lose when it comes to certain economic sanctions. France, certainly the biggest to lose when it comes to this arms embargo.
Yes, however, it does not prevent the sale of the Russian, the ship that France is planning to buy. It doesn't prevent the sale. However, the president of Latvia is going to petition President Hollande to try to get him to not buy this Russian aircraft carrier. So the knives are out. The EU has joined the U.S. in trying to prevent Russia from further actions in the Ukraine. And the sense is, let's go after their financial system. Let's go after their ability to try to start a shale gas program, and let's sort of cut them off at the knees in the hopes that Russia will step back and actually cooperate on Ukraine.
Is there a sense in Washington, and we covered this yesterday a little bit, that the oligarchs and Vladimir Putin to some extent owes his power to the oligarchs, are going to start really pressuring him, putting their economic best interests ahead?
It's very unclear whether the oligarchs, many of whom, like President Putin, are Russian nationalists, whether their pocketbooks will matter more than Russian pride. It really remains to be seen. Okay. In addition, Andrew, there are other places that they can go, and the hope is that they will find some way to squirm around these.
Okay. James Blue in Washington, thank you.
Thank you.
Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines across the nation. European and U.S. regulators have expanded their probe into so-called dark pools of trading. Two of Europe's largest banks, UBS and Deutsche Bank, say they have been contacted by authorities and are cooperating with the investigations. Last month, Barclays was hit with a suit alleging it favors high-speed frequency trading in dark pools. Dark pool trading systems allow investors to buy and sell securities anonymously, sparking concerns by regulators over the lack of transparency. A victory for U.S. airlines and its unions in the House of Representatives. Lawmakers passed bipartisan legislation allowing airlines to advertise just the base price of tickets before taxes and fees are added. Critics, groups representing airline passengers and companies, argue that the ads are misleading and confusing. However, the airlines say including the fees simply hurt business. If the bill becomes law, it would roll back federal regulations imposed in 2012. Two of Americans' favorite social programs are heading in opposite directions when it comes to funding. The government says Medicare will be able to continue paying full hospital benefits without any changes in the law until 2030. However, Social Security is projected to face an uphill battle, expected to pay only 81% of its benefits in 2016, unless Congress steps in. And global accommodations website Airbnb is rolling out a new plan to attract more business travelers. The company says it's creating a new section on its site for professionals looking for somewhere to stay while on a work trip, highlighting areas with business amenities. And despite beer consumption declining overall in the U.S., there are several states which apparently did not get the memo. A new study by the group Beer Marketers Insights shows that in these places, beer guzzling remains high. Here's a list of the top 5 beer drinking states: Vermont, South Dakota, Montana, New Hampshire, and North Dakota taking the top spot. North Dakotans consumed 43.3 gallons of beer per legal-aged drinking adults last year. It's almost one a week or so, gallon a week. Ahead, claiming that Dixie is the national anthem makes one Maryland politician our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Mainstream news has covered all of the issues of the world which are like this, through a very narrow lens. And at Arise News, we do things different. We cover every culture, every angle. Our mission is to go to these places, to these communities, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in Europe, Asia, the United States, the Caribbean. And we're going to find these stories and we're going to tell them to our audience. Stories that they probably never heard of before, and stories that they'll find interesting and engaging.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a Maryland politician who has been caught on tape attending a secession rally and singing Dixie, claiming that's the national anthem. It's not. Michael Peroutka is a Republican running for the County Council in Anne Arundel, Maryland. In 2012, he attended a convention of the League of the South, that's a pro-secession organization, where he gave a speech calling for the overthrow of the U.S. government. At the end, he asked everyone to sing the national anthem, except he sang Dixie, which was the de facto anthem of the Confederacy during the Civil War. Here is a clip.
I ask you to stand for the national anthem, please. Wish I was in the land of cotton, old times there, but not forgotten the way.
Look at that group there. Outstanding Americans. Now, Peroutka says he's not a racist and that he believes in equality for all Americans, except in 2012, he said the only answer to the current federal government is to break away and base a new country on biblical law. And so Michael Peroutka, who certainly comes close to the lines of treasonous words, is our favorite person of the day. Next, let's go public. What's behind the new rush to the stock market for companies? You're watching Arise Exchange.
On Arise Review, we take an in-depth look at the week's top stories. You'll hear from some of the best analysts in the world on a wide range of topics. Here are some highlights from our last show.
Any ceasefire, any lasting truce, as with any diplomatic agreement, has to give both parties something.
This upcycling trend is a little bit more recent, and I think especially with the ocean waste that we're seeing that's being incorporated into this collection, this is a fascinating new innovation and a great use for ocean waste plastic.
This split ruling gives the GOP another day to fight. And when you take this split ruling along with the Hobby Lobby case, it doesn't bode well, I think, for the Obama administration. And the question becomes, could Obamacare lose? Could it be like death by 1,000 cuts?
I'm Julian Phillips. Catch Arise Review every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 1500 GMT, only on Arise News.
This is the strongest week for initial public offerings in a decade. 20 IPOs are planned for the week. The breakdown includes several biotech companies and a spin-off of General Electric's North American retail finance operation. Also, Virgin America, the airline partly owned by British billionaire Richard Branson, announcing its filing for an IPO yesterday. John Marino is senior editor at The Deal, and he joins us now to talk us through this. Well, this is certainly good news for The Deal, which is about announcing public offerings, among other things. We kept hearing for years there's this aversion by companies to go public. And then we heard how lousy the regulatory environment is. So now, why is there this big rush to the market?
Well, as of late, it's the humongous rise up in the markets. Obviously, we're in the middle of a big bull market right now, which is just the best time to be taking a company public. But on top of that, there are so many companies that were enhanced and made more able to go public through the Jobs Act, which President Obama signed in 2012. And what it did, it essentially reduced the requirements that they have, which are a little bit burdensome before, and allows them to get public quicker.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because a lot of these companies are valued at less than $500 million and sort of fall into this Jobs Act. And to understand what the Jobs Act is, despite being called jobs, it's really in many ways about taking companies public and reducing what had been a very onerous regulatory requirement of all of this new paperwork, et cetera. And so is that you're starting to see some fruition from that?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things maybe that they should have called it was the Jobs for Bankers Act as opposed to the Jobs Act, because they've got companies including Twitter, which is obviously a humongous technology company that went public through the Jobs Act. Mm-hmm. There were hotels that are almost 40 years old run by private equity firms that went public through the Jobs Act. And I think that ultimately the regulation was a little bit too loose and allowed too many companies to come in, which isn't to say that we don't have a lot of terrific companies going public right now.
Yeah, you mentioned that because we have this huge rise in the stock market, but it sounds like maybe they missed the boat in going public. I mean, it's hard to time this, isn't it?
Right. Maybe not. I mean, we're still seeing so many companies, mature companies who have been public for years, decades, even reporting really solid earnings. Twitter right now is up 35% on their earnings report, which really beat expectations. But at the same time, some of these IPOs have a little bit too much day one pop. And Coupons is a terrific example of this. It doubled up on the first day of trading, but it's traded substantially down from that. And now people are comparing it to Groupon because it has a business model that's kind of easy to attack.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that, John, because, back in the heyday of 2000s, early 2000s, a lot of companies went public with no real clear business model and with no real profits. There's some concern that we're starting to see that again, especially in the technology space.
I would actually echo that concern across the SEC because we did a story at The Deal where we took a look back at federal filings, and it turned out that the SEC is a little bit underfunded for the specific division that it uses to oversee the Jobs Act IPOs for several years now.
Well, yeah, let me ask you about the regulations. I mean, do you think, though, that the regulations are adequately enforced and are tough enough when it comes to IPOs? Because there was this huge reaction, and there's an argument that we had this huge over-regulation that really strangled the ability to take companies public. And then you have private equity basically step in and leverage buyouts instead, the old LBOs, and that's not good either.
It's not exactly, I think, again, the intended purpose of the legislation. So is it actually followed through on the current legislation and regulated correctly? Yes, by the SEC, they're doing that now, or at least to the best of their ability. But I think ultimately the parameters that you can take a public company through under the Jobs Act as it stands from 2012 is still too wide right now.
About 30 seconds left. What are some of the sectors that you're seeing the deals go through?
Tech is going to be white hot. One big IPO coming out later this week is going to be Mobileye. It provides effectively car security technology. It could be a company that could be bought by a Tesla, or it could also be bought by a Ford, who's looking, I guess, to get a little bit more teched up inside the automobile.
And they're still using the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, or are we starting to see other exchanges come out there?
Well, again, to touch on your point earlier about people's aversion to going public, you had, secondary exchanges, stuff like Shares Post, Second Market, where people for a time could buy a lot of stocks up. And I feel like that was a really terrific opportunity for people to basically sell out, and for other folks to buy in pre-IPO.
Yeah, Second Market allows people who are inside the company to sell to other accredited investors.
Yes.
Okay, John Marino for The Deal. Great. Please come back soon. And that's our Rise Exchange for today. Let's take a look at the final numbers once again. The Dow Jones Industrial Average sliding there at the end of the day, down 70.48. The rest of the markets in the red. We're going to go to the Africa Summit on Monday. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching our Rise Exchange.